Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Matt here. In this video, I'm going to be giving my opinion on the MDT CKYE-POD. There's two on the table here, and one obviously looks a little different than what you might be used to. The one on the left, I just Cerakoted last weekend in burnt bronze, one of my favorite Cerakote colors. It was honestly looking pretty rough because this one is quite old actually. This was the first CKYE-POD I bought, and I can't remember the exact year I bought it, but it must have been 3 or 4 seasons ago. It's seen a lot of use, and before I Cerakoted it, it was really beat up. You can even see through the Cerakote on some of the edges here. There is some gouges and whatnot, so it's seen a lot of use, and that was one of the reasons why I did want to Cerakote it. But I purchased this one during one of the MDT Black Friday sales, and it was listed as a factory second, but it was in perfect condition that I could tell. So that was a really good deal a few years ago. And then this one on the right side, I just purchased last year when I was an MDT supported shooter. So obviously I did have a discount for that. I am not, at the time of filming this video, an MDT supported shooter. These are what I would consider a competition oriented bipod for a number of reasons, but mainly they are very quick to adjust, and they also have an extreme amount of adjustment, so you can really easily shoot off whatever you'd want to using a bipod that you might encounter in a PRS style match. Neither of these CKYE-PODs are in the factory configuration. For example, the one here on the right, I put an Area 419 clamp on it, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. And the one on the left here, I have an aftermarket tensioning knob. It's a little lever instead of the factory round knob like you see on the right one there. That's from Short Action Precision. Is just an aftermarket accessory, which I'm really fond of. And then also you'll notice I have taken off the grip tape on the legs. I do that immediately when I get a CKYE-POD because I'm not a fan of how MDT seems to throw grip tape on everything. I think it's, I don't want grip tape in my bag, so I just take it off, and I did replace it with just some gaffer tape, which has been working nicely. I did have gaffer tape on this one here, and when it gets all mangled up, I'll just replace it. It's quite straightforward. But now that this is burnt bronze, I might just leave the legs exposed because it kind of looks nice. So let's just look at one for now and see why I like it so much for competition use. As usual, it has sort of the two adjustments you would expect on any collapsible bipod, which is going to be your leg positions that fold down. So it does have an intermediate position here. As you can see, I hardly ever shoot with my bipods in a forward angle like this. I just don't like how the rifle reacts, or like I guess the recoil impulse when the bipod is set up like this. So I extend it out all the way, generally speaking. And then of course you can adjust the leg length, which is pretty standard again, like so. But as you can see there, all I had to do was pull on the legs and they extended out, so it's very quick, which is the first reason why they're so fast to adjust for competition use. Again, anywhere on the leg you can just grab it and pull it to a length that suits you, or just all the way out. And you only need to depress the lever here to collapse the leg back inwards. So that's pretty standard again. It is nice that you can do it so quickly, but there's another adjustment that I think makes this really nice for competition use, and that is what I'm gonna call the stance of the legs, or the angle between them. So you can see these two silver buttons on the back here, and if you depress this, the leg can move now side to side and adjust the stance. There's 3 settings on each leg: a wide setting, the middle setting, and a narrow setting, and you can use a combination of any of them. And you can do it very quickly. As you can see there, just press the button, move the leg, and then it can lock into a new position, which is beneficial because it gives you a lot more options when you're shooting a PRS style stage, and it's a lot more versatile than what other bipods can do. So that is really sweet. Again, as you might be able to tell, middle is the same stance as right or left, but you can make sure that your rifle is still level in any of the positions, because this clamp head on the bipod has an extreme amount of side to side cant to level your rifle out. So that's really easy to use, and it's very effective. Oftentimes in a stage, I'll start with the legs in sort of the middle default position, and if I find a position is too high, it's a lot quicker to just hit this button and splay one of the legs out wider and then re-level your rifle quickly. So that is sweet. and an example of why I think this thing is so versatile. It's because it's not only super adjustable, but it's also very quick to adjust. Now, there are a lot of knobs and buttons and stuff on this bipod, which takes a little bit of getting used to. I remember when I first started running the SkyPod, I would get some of the buttons mixed up of what did what. But once you run it a few times, it becomes very intuitive and you can do it a lot quicker without being too confused. As I mentioned before, I have an aftermarket accessory, which is this tension knob from Short Action Precision. You can quickly, easily adjust the tension in the cant of this clamp here with this little lever, which is a lot easier to adjust than the factory sort of knob. Now, it's usually a knob because it won't get in the way of the legs no matter what position they're in. So even when they're in the most narrow position, you'll never have a chance of hitting the knob. With the lever, if you're not careful, you can reposition the lever by pulling outwards. So if it's in a bad position and your leg is folded up, it can hit that. So you do have to be careful how you use this tensioning lever, but if you more or less just center it in the tension you like, you shouldn't run into many issues. The SkyPod also has another feature of adjustment, which is the pan. And I keep it locked almost all the time, but if I do need it, it is unlocked with this side switch here that you push downwards, and that will unlock the panning feature of this bipod. So even more ways and versatility in this bipod. Again, I don't generally have this switched on, but it is nice that you can toggle it on and off. Sometimes, again, for the troop lines and stationary position stages, it can be really nice to have that. The MDT clamp is also quite good, actually. I like how they designed the clamp. They did have an older generation of it, but the new ones here are both Picatinny and Arca Rail compatible in the same clamp, which is pretty sweet. I don't really even use pick rails anymore for my bipods, but the Arca Rail works well, and the knob is actually very nice and smooth. So then you might be wondering, well, why did you replace the other SkyPod head with the Area 419? And that is because of this switch here that I mentioned before to unlock the panning. Is really hard to get to with the MDT head. You can see it sits right above it, and you don't have much of surface area to actuate that switch. And sometimes the switch can be very hard to depress. It is kind of adjustable with a ball detent, but sometimes it can get a little bit jammed up and it's really hard to switch down. So I have oftentimes whipped out my pocket knife to get the blade under there and switch it down. Not during a stage, but when I'm preparing for it. This one here, because it sits higher, it sits on top of an ARMS 17 plate, which you can purchase from MDT to use it with a variety of different clamps. It gives you a lot of space here to access that little switch a lot easier. And that's a big reason why I swapped it out, you can see there. So just a little bit more room to access that switch, and I think that works pretty well for that. All right, so the SkyPod is a fantastic competition bipod. I really enjoy using it for matches, but it is not without its downsides. So I think some compromises had to be made in the design of this because it's so easily to adjust and there's so many things you can adjust on it. It inherently has a lot of small parts, and you can kind of just see that based on these little switches. Each switch has a little brass plunger, and then they have springs and all that. So there is quite a few small parts in a SkyPod, and I think they are generally high maintenance compared to other bipods. They can just run forever and not have to worry about them. But every few months, I'll check over my SkyPod and make sure nothing's coming loose. And then every season, at minimum, I will tear down the SkyPod down to the bolt and make sure all the springs are in good condition, lube all the parts, and reassemble. And that has been working really well for me. I have seen multiple SkyPods fail on the line, not because of the product quality, but because of lack of maintenance. You'll have people that will all of a sudden realize they're missing one of the thumb buttons. I've seen the entire clamp detach from the bipod before. The older SkyPod here that I've had for a number of years, I have had to swap out some small parts before, specifically the springs, because they did rust out on me. Not to the point where they weren't functioning, But one season I tore it apart as I usually do, and I noticed the springs were very rusted to the point where I was worried they weren't going to last much longer. So I did contact MDT and they were great. They shipped me out new springs right away. I think I've only had to do that once, but it is something that I keep in mind now. Because I just Cerakoted this, obviously I had it all apart down to the bolts, and it seemed okay. They were showing signs of a little bit of corrosion, but it's just surface, so I could remove that. But it's something you want to keep your eye on because, again, you have so many small parts, and some of the small parts are definitely exposed to the elements. So if you shoot a lot in the rain, you do want to just do a check over of these SkyPods to make sure they're going to keep working for you. Something else people don't love about the SkyPods is because they're so easy to adjust and you can just pull the legs out. They are built to a certain tolerance, which means they feel a little bit rattly. If you do shake it around, you can hear it does rattle, but that's not an issue because you're not ever moving your rifle like this. But they do feel less like tight than other bipods. If I was purely a bench shooter or like doing F-class or something, I personally would not run a SkyPod, but for PRS, it is perfect. Anyway, I can highly recommend the SkyPods. They're not cheap, but if you get one during the Black Friday sale or even secondhand, I think it's a really good option and a really good tool to have for PRS matches. Anyway, if you have any questions as usual, I'll do my best to answer. And if not, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Cheers.